The lantern illuminated the lantern room, its glass walls streaked with grime. In the center of the room was a metal pedestal, etched with the same symbols as Marek's book. He placed the book on the pedestal and began arranging candles in a precise circle. "What happens if we succeed?" I asked, my voice hollow. "The pact is broken. The creatures return to the sea. The eclipse ends," Marek said without looking up. "And if we fail?" He paused. "Then the sea claims everything." As he prepared the ritual, I stared out at the ocean. The black water roiled violently, waves crashing against the cliffs with unnatural force. On the shore below, the creatures were gathering. Dozens of them, their pale bodies shimmering like fish scales under the dim light. They moved in unison, their heads tilted toward the lighthouse as if waiting. "It's ready," Marek said. He handed me a knife, its blade curved and wickedly sharp. I stared at him, my hand trembling. "You have to," he interrupted, his voice urgent. "The blood must touch the book. It's the only way." Before I could respond, a thunderous crash shook the lighthouse. The creatures had reached the door. Their guttural wails echoed up the staircase, a terrible sound that made my stomach churn. "We're out of time," Marek shouted. "Do it!" The room seemed to close in around me, the storm raging outside mirrored by the chaos within. My pulse pounded in my ears as I raised the knife, the blade catching the flicker of the candlelight. And then, with a deep breath, I pressed it to my palm. The blade bit into my palm, sharp and unyielding, releasing a rivulet of blood that dripped onto Marek's open book. The symbols on its pages flared to life, glowing a sickly green that cast eerie shadows across the walls of the lighthouse. The air crackled with energy, a low hum reverberating in my bones. Outside, the storm raged fiercer. The creatures clawed at the lighthouse door, their guttural wails merging with the roar of the wind. Marek chanted in a language I couldn't understand, his voice rising above the chaos as the symbols on the pedestal pulsed in time with his words. I staggered back, clutching my bleeding hand. The room felt alive, the very walls shuddering with each toll of an unseen bell. The glass of the lantern room trembled, distorting the view of the black ocean below. The creatures on the shore writhed and twisted, their movements frantic, as if the ritual was tearing at them from the inside. "Marek!" I shouted, panic lacing my voice. "Is it working?" He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the book, his expression a mask of grim determination. The symbols glowed brighter, their light so intense it seared my vision. The lighthouse itself groaned under the strain, the wind howling through every crack and crevice. And then the door shattered. The creatures poured in, their elongated limbs contorting unnaturally as they scrambled up the spiral staircase. Their eyeless faces were fixed on the lantern room, their mouths hanging open in silent screams. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering as the first of them emerged at the top of the stairs. "Marek!" I screamed, but he didn't flinch. He continued chanting, even as the first creature lunged for him. I grabbed the knife from the pedestal, my palms slick with sweat and blood. As the creature reached Marek, I slashed wildly, the blade cutting deep into its slick flesh. It shrieked, a high-pitched sound that sent shivers down my spine before collapsing into a pool of black ichor. But more were coming. They swarmed the room, their pale, glistening bodies filling the space. I swung the knife desperately, each strike fueled by pure adrenaline. One of the creatures grabbed my arm, its grip icy and unrelenting, pulling me toward its gaping maw. I kicked it away, my foot sinking into its rubbery flesh as I fought to free myself. Marek's voice faltered, and I turned to see a creature's claws raking across his chest. Blood spattered the book, and for a moment, the glowing symbols dimmed. My stomach dropped. "Marek, no!" I shouted. With a final guttural cry, Marek slammed his hand down on the book, his blood mixing with mine on the pages. The symbols flared brighter than ever, the light erupting outward in a blinding wave. The creatures screamed, their bodies convulsing as the light consumed them. One by one they collapsed, their forms dissolving into streams of black mist that swirled toward the ocean. The storm outside began to wane, the wind dying down to a low whisper. I dropped the knife, my hands shaking as the last of the creatures vanished. The room was eerily quiet now, save for the crackling of the oil lamp. Marek lay slumped against the pedestal, his breathing shallow, his face pale. "It's done," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Before I could press him further, he vanished. The photograph and the locket remained, silent reminders that Sam's games weren't just play. They were something much darker. The attic had always been a forbidden place. My mother warned me never to go up there, claiming it was unsafe, just a dusty, sagging space filled with junk. But that night, after Sam's disappearance, I found myself standing at the base of the creaky staircase, the trapdoor above yawning open like a waiting mouth. "You need to see," Sam whispered from somewhere behind me. His voice was faint, almost melodic, drifting like smoke in the cold air. I turned, but he wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He never lingered when it mattered most. Taking a deep breath, I climbed the narrow steps, the wooden boards groaning beneath my weight. The attic smelled of mildew and neglect, the air thick with dust motes that danced in the faint moonlight, filtering through a small window. The temperature dropped noticeably as I stepped inside. The space was cluttered with forgotten relics, an old chest overflowing with moth-eaten fabric, shelves sagging under the weight of books with cracked spines, and broken furniture piled haphazardly in one corner. But it was the mirror that caught my attention. It stood against the far wall, tall and ornate, its frame carved with intricate patterns of twisting vines and faces that seemed to watch me. The glass itself was flawless, almost too perfect, reflecting the dim light with an unsettling clarity. Sam's voice returned, soft and insistent. "Look closer." My feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the mirror. As I stood before it, the air seemed to hum with tension. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, but the room behind me looked different. The cluttered shelves were gone, replaced by a neatly arranged study. A writing desk stood where the pile of broken chairs had been, and the floor was polished wood instead of dusty planks. "Do you see it?" Sam's voice came from the mirror this time, his reflection materializing beside mine. He looked different, less shadowy, more solid, and his expression was grave. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's what was," Sam replied. The scene in the mirror shifted, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. I saw the woman from the photograph, seated at the desk, her hands trembling as she wrote in a leather-bound journal. A man, her husband, paced the room, his face red with anger, his fists clenched. "They knew," Sam said, his tone heavy with accusation. "They knew what they did to me." "What did they do?" I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. The mirror answered. The scene changed again, revealing a small boy, Sam, hiding in a cupboard as the man from the photograph stormed through the room, shouting. The woman wept softly in the corner, her gaze fixed on the door. "They took everything from me," Sam said, his voice breaking. "My home, my life, all for their lies." The boy in the reflection turned toward me, his face streaked with tears. His eyes, dark and accusing, met mine, and I felt a chill race down my spine. The glass shuddered, the image dissolving into darkness. My own reflection returned, but Sam stayed behind, his expression twisting into something unfamiliar, something angry. "Fix it," he said, his voice a guttural snarl. Before I could respond, The mirror cracked violently, splintering from the center outward. The shards refracted the dim light, creating a kaleidoscope of fractured images. I stumbled back, my heart racing, as Sam's voice echoed through the attic. "Fix it, Evan, or it will never stop." I barely slept that night. The fragments of the mirror haunted me, their jagged edges glinting in my mind like shards of guilt. Sam's words echoed endlessly. Fix it. But how? The next morning, I decided to find answers. A historian at the local library, Mrs. Elkins, had spent years researching the history of the manor. If anyone could help me, it was her. The library smelled of aged paper and ink, its tall shelves casting long shadows under the dim lighting. Mrs. Elkins, a sharp-eyed woman with hair like spun silver, greeted me with a curious smile. "You're one of the new residents at the Wexler Manor, aren't you?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with intrigue. I nodded, fumbling to explain what I'd seen. I left out the part about Sam, framing my questions around the family who had lived there before us. Her expression darkened. The Wexlers were a troubled lot, wealthy, influential, but always surrounded by whispers of scandal. The boy, Samuel, vanished under mysterious circumstances. They claimed he ran away, but not everyone believed that. My stomach twisted. What happened to him? Mrs. Elkins hesitated, then pulled an old newspaper clipping from her desk. The headline read, "Child missing after fire at Wexler Manor." Beneath it was a grainy photograph of the boy, Sam. They said the fire was an accident, she continued. But there were rumors of darker things, a dispute over the family fortune, perhaps. Some even said Samuel's mother had planned it, that she was desperate to escape her husband's cruelty. Did they ever find him? No, Mrs. Elkins said softly. His body was never recovered. A cold weight settled in my chest. Sam hadn't run away. He hadn't escaped the fire. He had been left behind. Is there a way to help him? I asked, my voice trembling. Mrs. Elkins studied me, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. There's an old ritual, one meant to sever the ties between the living and the dead, but it's dangerous, and it requires something precious from both sides. What do you mean? You must offer him a way to let go, she said. And in return, you must sacrifice something equally important. Her words lingered as I left the library, the weight of them pressing down on me like a physical force. That night, as I sat in my room, clutching the locket Sam had unearthed, I realized what he wanted wasn't just justice. He wanted release. But was I willing to pay the price? The storm raged outside as I prepared for the ritual. The house felt alive, trembling beneath the howling wind. Shadows writhed across the walls, their shapes unnatural and fluid, as if the manor itself disapproved of what I was about to do. I stood in the attic, the air heavy with tension. The locket, photograph, and broken mirror shards lay on the floor before me, arranged in a crude circle. Mrs. Elkins's instructions echoed in my mind. Call him to the place where it began. Offer him what was taken. Give him a reason to let go. The flickering candle beside me barely held its flame, sputtering as if it too feared what was coming. Sam, I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm here. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogging the air. A soft creak came from the rocking chair in the corner. It swayed gently, though no breeze stirred. Then he appeared. Sam materialized slowly, his pale form coalescing from the darkness. He looked smaller now, his shoulders hunched, his expression etched with sorrow. But his eyes, those eyes bore into me, filled with an ancient, seething rage. Why did you bring me back here? His voice was softer than before, but carried the weight of accusation. You want to be free, I said, clutching the locket tightly. But you need to tell me how. Sam stepped closer, his bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The shadows around him seemed to move with purpose, curling toward me like tendrils. "They lied," he said, his voice trembling with fury. "They burned me to keep their secrets. My own blood betrayed me." I swallowed hard, the enormity of his pain pressing down on me. "I can't change what happened," I said, holding up the locket. "But I can give you this. Your mother, she kept it. Maybe she loved you in her own way." Sam's gaze flicked to the locket, his expression unreadable. The air around him grew heavier, charged with something electric and wild. "It's not enough," he whispered. The floorboards groaned beneath me, and the shadows surged forward, wrapping around my ankles like icy chains. Panic clawed at my chest as I struggled against them. "Sam, please," I cried. "What do you want from me?" His face twisted with anguish, and he pointed a trembling finger at the photograph. "The truth," he said. "Tell them the truth. Make them remember what they did." The mirror shards at my feet shimmered faintly, their fractured surfaces catching the flickering light. I understood then. He didn't just want freedom. He wanted justice. "I'll do it," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll tell them everything. The fire, the lies. They'll know. But you have to let me go." Sam hesitated, his form flickering like a dying flame. The shadows around me tightened, then loosened, retreating slightly. "Promise me," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Promise me you'll make them see." "I promise," I whispered. The air shifted. The candle flared briefly before extinguishing itself, plunging the attic into darkness. Sam's figure dissolved into the shadows, his presence fading like smoke in the wind. The oppressive weight in the room lifted, replaced by a hollow stillness. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, clutching the locket as though it were a lifeline. The mirror shards lay still, their faint glow extinguished. Sam was gone. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the house eerily quiet. I packed my belongings, including the photograph and locket, determined to uncover the full truth of what happened to Sam. As I stepped outside, the cold air bit at my skin. I glanced back at the manor, its weathered facade casting long shadows in the morning light. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure in the attic window, a small boy watching, his face solemn. Then the reflection disappeared, leaving only the empty glass. Sam was free. But deep down, I knew the price of my promise. The truth I'd vowed to reveal would unearth horrors buried long ago, secrets that might never let me go. And as I walked away from the manor, the faint echo of a child's laughter followed me, carried on the wind like a haunting farewell.